In 2017, LEGO released some Technic sets with a special printed brick commemorating the theme's 40th anniversary. On top of that, they provided instructions to combine 3 of those sets into a special alt model, a contemporary interpretation of the classic 8860 car chassis, which we reviewed recently. We took some time to gather all the parts for this review, first acquiring 8860 from eBay, then 2 of the 3 sets from Lug Events, and finally the 3rd set from eBay again. While we already made 60-second reviews for the 3 component sets, let's take a closer look at them. The 42057 ultralight helicopter, the 42061 telehandler, and the 42063 BMW R1200 GS Adventure. The largest set of the lot, the BMW, continues a long tradition of Technic motorcycles such as 8422. Over the years, these sets have grown in size and polish. Compared to the Circuit Shock Racer, 42063 has nearly twice the parts and more cosmetic details, though it doesn't actually add any functionality. I'd call the front suspension link the most interesting mechanism in this set. Front suspensions of the past, when applicable, often had 2 parallel shocks supporting the wheel. The one in 42063 has a sliding joint and a 4-bar linkage connected through ball joints. This apparently models the prototype's actual suspension setup. While the prototype also has a boxer engine, and the BMW packaging even talks about it, the modeled engine doesn't actually box. The pistons connect to the same crank and move in the same direction. They should connect to opposite cranks and move in opposite directions. We also noticed that the blue parts come in slightly different shades. This typically happens when different parts use different materials. For example, friction cross-axle pins versus friction 3-length pins. But in this case, the mismatched parts all felt pretty samey. The second largest set, 42061, has the best function to part ratio of the 3, but also the worst part per dollar ratio. Large parts like the wheels and the boom undoubtedly bump up the price. The new worm gear first appeared in 2017, perhaps in order to directly drive said racks. Like a lot of small sets today, the telehandler has a gearless steering implementation. A clever series of links turns all 4 wheels, albeit with no Ackerman correction. The smallest set, the ultralight helicopter, also feels the most mediocre. The many functions for the size don't actually work that well. The angled wheels scrub quite a bit since the entire model also leans forward, and we found it hard to work the rotors, attached with friction by the way, without a crank. The set also has at least 1 random gear floating around, making it feel even more like a part spin for the anniversary alt model. After taking the sets apart, we noticed a discrepancy with their part colors. Some sets have yellow odd-length axles, and others have red even-length axles, etc. LEGO certainly changes Technic element colors over time, but we thought it surprising to see these changes within a single generation. The lists in the back of the manuals usually only useful for inventory, also proved useful for finding parts for the alt model. For the few multi-set models that LEGO made in the past, they included instructions or parts of instructions along with the component sets. For the anniversary chassis, they eschewed physical instructions altogether. You can find a digital manual only on the support website alongside the instructions for the component sets. Said manual also pays tribute to the instructions of the past with some black and yellow striping on the cover. You can see similar striping on the 8860 manual and even in this later 8044 manual. The steps themselves reflect contemporary LEGO step design with many steps and few parts per step. Still, they managed to include some sketchy building techniques more commonly found in older sets. Some assemblies require you to flex parts into position. Not a lot, but enough to notice in the transmission and the fan. The shifter also uses half bushings to grip an axle, something older models did a lot and newer models try to avoid. For better or worse, the contemporary solution usually requires specialized parts. I appreciate how the anniversary chassis hides some of the stickers from the component sets. B models of the past would often show A model stickers in random places. 2 BMW stickers go under the hood, and you don't need to use the stickered 5-length beams, though we accidentally used one anyway. Despite the fairly wide part selection, you can tell when they started to run out of parts. Some pins stick out into nowhere, and the frame and the chairs both have some seemingly needless asymmetries. Ultimately, the finished model uses about 550 of the 1100 parts from all three sets, though it looks like a more substantial amount from the remaining bits. Compared to 8860, it uses 15% less parts, but takes up 50% less space. This follows a trend of newer sets generally having greater parts density than older sets. The anniversary chassis has 5 functions by our count. It rolls, it steers, the engine turns, the transmission shifts, it has independent rear suspension, and each seat has 1 degree of adjustability. At first blush, it seems like they got all but one feature, the seat backs, but it falls shorter upon closer inspection. First and foremost, the rear axle doesn't have a differential, so the wheels scrub in turns. Furthermore, the linked steering has little reduction, and the overall action feels very jerky. The transmission has 2 speeds compared to the original 3, but you could argue that one gear gets locked out in the original anyway. The swing arm suspension already felt stiff on 8860, but it feels even stiffer on the rebuild. The engine also has a slightly different greeble makeup, though the overall layout down to the fan actually matches. On the flip side, the proportions of the overall model don't quite match, but the colors do. The red chairs, the blue transmission, the gray hood, and even the blue trim on the bumpers. Both models also have the same off-center steering wheel, a strange detail to carry over to the anniversary chassis. Overall, 8860 feels more like an actual car chassis, whereas the Tribute feels more like a go-kart chassis. I think part selection does hinder the model. At the very least, one of the component sets really should have had a differential. Perhaps including some kind of car would have made things too easy, but I personally would have liked to see this as a standalone set, where the designers could go all out on reimagining 8860 properly. On that note, this is the end of the video, so have a nice day.